Okay, good morning, everyone. We'll get started. So this morning, I wanted to talk a bit about perception, another of the skandhas, and some of its manifestations, but particularly thinking. So look at that aspect of the mind or sort of mental faculties, the thinking faculty. But perception, or samjna in Pali, is broader. It's basically everything that is how we cognize, how we recognize objects, ideas, how we make sense of our outer and inner world. I think I mentioned at one point this huge sort of memory data bank that we build up through our lives. I've worked quite a lot with babies, and so I have a bit of a sense of how that process of repetition through which the memory bank works. It builds up. It's like you watch babies in a nursery and they'll do something over and over and over again, and they'll take absolute delight in the doing of it again and again and again. And the same with when they're first learning to speak. There'll be a particular phrase that, as any parent will know, will just come out again, and what's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? Until it, as a parent, it pretty much drives you mad. But that's that process of in a way, things going into that memory bank, that perceptual tank, as it were. And it creates the building blocks of ideas and views that we can, if you like, it's the foundations from which we can perch more and more sort of infrastructure on as we go through our lives. And that both the basis, the foundation, and the added infrastructure are conditioned, if you like. They're filtered through our own conditioning, our own particular social conditioning, our educational conditioning, our racial conditioning. All sorts of factors come into play in shaping our particular self-structure, if you like. Carry on the building metaphor. So sometimes the data that goes to make part of that structure from our sense impressions, our sense data, because it's conditioned. It's only it's partial in its accuracy. Particularly when feeling and perception work together. We can make certain assumptions based on whether the feeling of an object is pleasant or unpleasant. And if it's unpleasant, then there's that more that tendency, as we spoke about yesterday, to shy away, to have an aversive response, and that all gets sort of packed into the structure. Oh, okay. Not very keen on that, or something that reminds me of that, or something that 10 years ago I didn't like. So this data bank has long memories, and is very selective. I think that's so it's selective. It's based on faulty information and quite a superficial reading. As we get more and more structure in place, we get further and further away actually from the basic foundations, and perhaps further and further away from the basic sense experience. So we're reliant more and more on these the concept world that we've we've constructed, that we've built up. And that concept world is really vital. We can't function without it. But as I say, it doesn't necessarily give us a very accurate sense of what's happening. Partly because concepts tend to fix things, so we don't relate to what's happening in terms of the causes and conditions, which are different in every moment, different causes and conditions coming together in a moment. We have a more fixed idea of well, both the objects around us, which is quite useful. It's quite useful to be able to look at a flat brown object with long skinny bits underneath it and be able to instantly recognize it as a table. But it's not so useful perhaps if we do that with people, if we do it with ourselves or do it with somebody else. We see them as more fixed rather than something in process, something in flow. And a friend of mine, we were on a pre-ordination retreat up at Dharmakosha many years ago, and she had a little insight into a way that she was relating to herself in this case, and she phrased it as, oh, I'm not the sort of person who, in her case in this moment, is I'm not the sort of person who likes ritual. That doesn't fit in with my self-view, my self-image. I'm not the sort of person. But actually, what she realized is you could put anything after that. I'm not the sort of person who ... because there's so many ways in which we fix and have ideas and views about ourselves, which fix us, but then of course we're doing the same to other people. So usual perception is a bit like that. We misperceive a situation. We have perhaps a more superficial glance at what's being perceived, and we're satisfied with that. That's our usual perception. Preconceptions or misconceptions. Subhuti says, we make a compromise with reality. We don't look too closely at our experience. So we use perception to sort of get by. But what mindfulness does is try to look more closely at what's actually happening, at the direct experience. It's still aware of the concepts, of the ideas and views and thoughts around what's happening, but it's not quite so bought into them or identified with them. So with mindfulness, there's more ability to look at a situation afresh in the present moment and get a bit of a handle on those preconceptions. We start to be able to see our conditioning more clearly. I had a period when I lived in Cambridge. I had a period of working in what was called a pupil referral unit. I wasn't really trained to do this. I was trained to work with much younger children, but there I was working with kids, teenagers from quite difficult backgrounds, and most of them were in the unit because they'd been excluded from school, often on the grounds of their behavior. So it was it wasn't, I didn't find it an easy working environment. It was somewhere where I had to get used to being sworn at every day as part of my working day. But often I remember a particular incident that happened more than once with kids who would say, they'd get quite aggressive and say, oh, you're looking at me, stop looking at me. And I'd say, oh, well, I'm not actually, I'm not really looking at you. But there was a sort of conditioned response towards yeah, by past experiences, and in quite a lot of cases, quite a lot of experiences with drugs, that they couldn't believe what I was saying, that I wasn't actually looking at them. There was a sort of heightened suspicion about what a passing glance meant in this particular case. And they couldn't believe that I wasn't actually looking at them, and more than that, looking at them with some sort of bad intent. So yeah, we misperceive all the time based on our previous conditioning, and that's not a judgment on our conditioning. Of course, we've all got different types of conditioning and condition different responses in the present moment. And we don't realize often how colored our perception is by all these past experiences. I remember once actually hearing Bhante, possibly in a personal conversation, possibly in a talk, say something like he thought that in understanding our conditioning was about 90% of the work of the spiritual life. You know, understand and putting it in the framing for this morning, understanding how perception, feeling and perception, especially working together, color and condition our current responses. It's a huge part of the spiritual life. So I'm talking about sort of in a way conditioning in quite a personal way, and concepts that affect individuals. But there's I think traditionally 6 different types of concepts, and I've asked a couple of teachers about this, and between us we can never quite get the whole list of 6. But there's a couple that I found quite influential on my own practice, and one is location. The concept of location, so things being in here or out there. And you can get a very simple but meaningful sense of this through sound. I mean, in fact, you could try it now if you have any sounds around. Just as I'm speaking, I'll leave bits of silence. So what we tend to do, what happens, what actually happens is that hearing arises. There's hearing, and that happens quite naturally. That we're able to, the mind takes in sounds as they arise. And I've been talking about receiving whatever arises. So receiving sounds. But what we've probably been conditioned to do through our, in a way, a universal type of conditioning, is to think of sounds as being in here, or more often out there. So sometimes actually it's quite possible to recognize the imputing of that concept onto the experience of sound. So it's not just that the sound is heard. It's not just that hearing is happening, but often there's perhaps an image of the bird out there in a tree. You might not be able to see it, but somehow the imagination sort of fills in the gaps. It thinks it knows what it's hearing, so it builds up this picture. It fills out the perceptual picture. A bird out there, car over there. So it imputes this sense of space. But actually what we can know in our direct experience is sound. But based on how loud or soft the sound is, or what type of sound it is, then we'll have various ideas. Oh, that's the sound of the roller they use in the bowling green behind that's the sound of the squirrels running over the cabin roof. You know, we impute, and to some extent the mind automatically does that. Perception does its job, if you like. But what we want to do is to sort of roll back a bit from those concepts being the dominant experience to being something that allows more space for the direct experience of what's actually happening, and what are the ideas that get put all around those experiences. So hearing can be a fun way of playing with that. And what happens, in a way, sometimes the concepts will drop away. It will be the more pure experience of just hearing. Hearing is happening. And notice how sound is experienced then. Notice the differences in the experience. There's sometimes we can tell, maybe I'll just say, sometimes we can get a sense of perception working in the mind more clearly when we can't quite work out what's going on. Perhaps there's a sound we can't quite hear. And so there's that, you can recognize that the mind is trying to work it out. It's like perception's trying to get a handle on that particular sound, or maybe that particular sight. And so in those moments where we don't know is an opportunity to recognize perception trying to do its job. And sometimes that can happen. I've got a little story here, some of you will have heard before. One of my favorite people was the neuropsychologist Oliver Sacks, who wrote these wonderful, wonderful books about various things that, sometimes diseases of the brain, sometimes just you know, different sort of, what they often reveal as different sort of perceptual situations. And he describes meeting this man who was maybe in his early 50s. And he had some learning difficulties, had some but mild learning difficulties. But he had become blind when he was maybe 2 or 3. And then he, 50 years later, medicine had moved on, and he was able to have his sight restored. And I think my impression from what's written is that people weren't quite, I think they thought, oh, that would be how it would be. It would be sort of great. He'd be able to see again. Certainly that was his, the people around him, his family, that was their perception, was that he'd be able to, but actually he hadn't built up that data bank. He hadn't built up the memory of those visual perceptions. And so what he would approach a set of steps and just see them as a series of straight lines. So he didn't have the depth perception. He hadn't learned, you know, as these toddlers do when they're climbing steps over and over and over again as children. So he had to sort of relearn these perceptions over and over and over again. And one of the things that his wife just really couldn't get her head around was that he had a cat and a dog, and the dog was quite small, and they were both coloured black and white. And he could not tell the difference between the two. They were quite good friends, and they would come sort of racing in after each other, playing around. And he would not be able to tell which was the cat and which was the dog until he grabbed hold. And then he could, with his tactile perceptions, which were very well developed, of course, he could distinguish straight away this sort of coarser hair of the dog, or the silky ears of the cat. So yeah, he's got a variety of very lovely stories around that reveal quite a lot about the nature of perception. Yeah, so, oh, actually, maybe one more thing. Can't resist saying this. So sometimes also what happens in meditation is that as we start sitting a bit more with our direct experience, and many of you may have had experiences like this. One of the most common experiences in meditation early on is to get what we call samapati experiences. So that you might experience this as you're sitting in meditation, the hands feel really big, really sort of swollen, or the body feels like a Michelin person. It's really very different sort of shape and feel. Or I had one person say to me that they felt that their head was swiveled. Their body was sitting facing forward, their head was swiveled 180 degrees the other way. And they actually had to open their eyes to check that that was not the case. So they can, these perceptual shifts can feel very, very, very real. And I think it happens because we're less identified with the mental picture, the mental version of our body. In meditation, if you like, we let go of that. Often the eyes are closed. So we're not constantly having that sort of update to the memory banks through the visual sense, or through movement, through touch sensations, through movement. We're sitting still, eyes closed, and in a way then we're the shape of the body or the feel of the body is more in line with what we're experiencing through the tactile sensations of the body. So it may be that the hands are really swollen because there are many, many nerve endings in the hands. They're very sensitive part of the body. They swell up. It can be quite fun. Those sorts of things can be quite fun. And they're a sign that actually there's that we are relating a bit more to the direct experience, and the concepts have just sort of got a bit looser, which is what we want in order to be able to see, to see both, to have a bit more space to see concepts as concepts, rather than them be completely believed in and bought into. So we see them a bit more from the side of a spacious awareness, spacious open awareness that can know more the direct experience, and it can know concepts as concepts, ideas as ideas, and thoughts as thoughts. So that's what I want. I want to move on to thoughts, but maybe if there are one or two, any questions of clarification, let's do that now. Just yeah. So sorry, Vajradevi suggesting I tell you how to do that. We talked about that. So yeah, so I can see people on the front page. So I can see Mo had her hand up. But if you're not, yeah, I can't necessarily see. So you could. What did we say, Vajradevi? I can't remember.
You can put your hand up electronically through reactions.
Did you hear that? No. So you can put your hand up electronically through reactions.
Or send me a private chat message.
Or send Vajradevi a private chat message, but that's a little bit slower. Yeah. So just to be, for it to be clear how you make a. You might, depending on your device, you may not have a reaction, or you can put your hand up, but it may not be seen, and if I can't see you. But anyway, for the moment, Mo, do you want to unmute yourself and just say something of this? I can't hear you. Can't hear you. You're not muted. Sorry, you are muted. Can she unmute herself? Sorry, okay, Mo's not able to unmute herself, maybe. So anybody else have a, okay, so either Karen or Darren has got a hand up, so yes. Sorry, Mo, yeah.
Sorry. Yes, my question would be, when we want to hear something in the distance and we can't quite hear it, often if we close our eyes, so in other words, shut down another sense to make the hearings, that's what I do. If I was listening to the dog far off, where is she? I'd close my eyes, and so my hearing would become better for me. So
a bit more of a dominant sense. Yeah. So that's in a way helping make our perceptions work better for us. Yeah, great. And so so sorry, I was going to say something in relation to that.
I was going to say it intensifies the other sense, the hearing sense, doesn't it? If we close our eyes, or
it does, and that's how it worked with Virgil, this man who was blind. It's like he had a very strong sort of touch sensation. But what we might do in the practice, if you're sitting and meditating, then in a way what you need to do is let go of that desire to hear clearly.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, it's what can be heard. I mean, does it really help anyway to I'm not saying this is what you're suggesting, but what we can do is strain to hear, or try to make something out, strain to see. And actually in the practice, there's a certain sort of letting go of hearing. It might be that the sound quality is a bit bad, and you can't quite hear what I'm saying, or I freeze and then I suddenly come out with a rush of words, as happens with Zoom. What we do with concepts is that the emphasis is all on understanding, and in some ways contorting a bit to do that. Like we scrunch up our eyes or nose, or we furrow our brows to try and hear, or to try and see, or we might even lean a few inches into as if it makes much difference. And actually, all we need to do in meditation is to stay relaxed, to stay settled back. What's heard is heard, and what's understood is secondary. So it's sound, it's hearing. That's what we're practicing. I'm not saying this is a way to live your life, if you like. We need to understand at times, but settling back, relaxing. What's happening? Sound is happening. Rather than that constant sort of move into prioritizing concepts, which means prioritizing the conceptual content. So thanks.
Thank you.
Stimulated
Thank
that. Okay, Karen or Darren, whichever one of you it was who wanted to say that.
Hi. The question I was about the skandhas.
Can you lean forward a bit, Darren, because I can't hear that well.
The question I was going to ask was about the skandhas. Are they one directional? So form gives a rising to feeling, gives a rise to perception, gives a rise to mental formations, or is it two-way traffic?
I don't know that it's that linear. I mean, in a way, they work together, nama rupa. There's an interrelationship between. So there's messages constantly going back and forward. So I guess that would be a two-way thing. But you've got different mind moments. So you've got feeling and perception, which are conditioned. So they are there's certain feelings and perceptions coming into the present moment. And then you've got samskara, or which we'll be looking at tomorrow, so more the sort of that volitional act, that's more from the present moment, what we do with those sense impressions, with those perceptions and feelings that have been received in that present moment. I suspect that there's other ways of looking at them too, but that's maybe just a couple for now.
Eric, Tracy, and Linda.
Okay, and okay, Eric. Is Eric there? Maybe having trouble unmuting. I can't see Eric on the front page. Is he trying to unmute? How about Tracy? We go to Tracy first. No? Okay. Okay. All right, there he is, Eric.
I think I've managed to unmute myself. It was telling me the host had not allowed me to unmute.
Right, okay, that's blame Vajradevi then.
Well, it's always a good move, isn't it? Yeah, but my question was, it seemed as if you were using the word conditioning, concepts, ideas sort of interchangeably. Could you separate them out for me, or are they just interchangeable?
I think that maybe concepts is the whole sort of broad term, all the sort of different ways in which we construe or construct. And then maybe ideas, opinions, views are also part of that infrastructure. And then individual thoughts come out of that. Though, of course, thoughts will go into the forming of the views. And yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So I think Linda had a question, and okay, we're probably not going to get to all these. I think it will. Actually, feel free if you want to put them in the chat. Then we can try and I'll try and address them later. I won't be able to address them all, but I might be able to address them within the teaching. So let's hear from Linda, and then I'll leave it there.
Oh, thank you. It's more of a comment really about perception and survival, and how we need, sometimes it feels like we, you know, it's like a biological survival response to a sound occurring, i.e. a loud noise, and what that might mean. Mm. And if I'm just wondering how much we create that space so we're not reacting, but there's perhaps an innate part of us that needs to know before purposes of survival, if that makes sense. Yeah,
I think in a way that, oh, sorry.
Yeah, like in public places, and there's a loud noise, and it's like a survival instinct kicks in about what that might mean.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I think the evolutionary sirens, if you like, that flag up the danger, the need to attend. I'm sure that's important. But from what I understand now is mainly that mechanism fires these days. Maybe when we were hunter-gatherers, it fired every few days when a lion approached or something, or a wild boar. But actually, what I understand from our systems is that they got attuned to responding to those signals of danger. In a way, they've lost a sense of discrimination. Actually, the firing seems to be going off all the time. There's a perception of danger, a perception, or that sort of on the lookout for those things. And I think we need to find some sort of balance that, in a way, to be settled back, to be with our direct experience. I suppose what I'm saying is it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that we don't respond, that we don't recognize the concept for what it is. Loud sound, what does that mean? But we're back in here rather than out there, in a way, scanning for, if you like, the danger clues. So it doesn't mean we switch off the concepts, I suppose. There's still the possibility of recognizing, but there's more, there's more a sort of settled back way of doing that. And there's times perhaps when we're at home, most of the time we don't need, we can practice more playing with that realm of being more with the direct experience. How necessary are the concepts? And maybe what I'm saying is we rely on the concepts more than we need to for our evolutionary and biological sort of roots, if you like. And in fact, you could say that in relying, settling back, resting, perhaps we're closer in a way, certainly from the nervous system's point of view, perhaps we're just closer to being tuned in to what we need to respond to than to our ideas in terms of our concept world, our ideas about what might happen. Yeah. Okay, I think someone just unmuted themselves, but I think we need...
Vajradevi, the chat's still disabled.
Okay, thank you. So we'll switch the chat on so you can write questions in there. Thanks, Vicky. Okay, let's have a bit of a leg stretch. Write your questions in the chat if you want to, and I'll try and get to them later. Just a 2-3 minute leg stretch, and then I'll lead us in a short sort of meditative exercise. Sitting position or lying down. So I want to move on to looking at thinking, and I will say some things about thinking, but I wanted us just to start with a way of looking at thoughts that can help us initially to identify the types of thoughts that we're having. We're looking eventually to, well, not even eventually, but we're looking to not identify with our thinking, and particularly not with the content of the thinking, but not even with the thought itself, just being able to recognize a thought as a thought in the mind. And so one way to start to get a sense of that can be through a simple labeling process. And many of you may have done this before, so we'll be familiar with it. So maybe just as I'm talking, you can just do your own settling into the practice, settling into body, and that sense of knowing, awareness, knowing what's happening. So with recognizing thinking in the mind, we're looking a bit more directly at the mind and its processes. And if you find when that happens that you start to feel a bit separate from your physical experience, a bit in your head, yeah, just broaden out the awareness, broaden out. So perhaps look at thoughts and thinking for short periods of time and then go back to just settling in a broader sense that includes your physical sensations. So reconnecting with embodied awareness. One of the concepts actually we can notice is that we can get indications that we think awareness is in the head or the mind is in the head and that the head isn't part of the body. So watch out for those, watch out for perhaps images in the mind, some sort of separation of mind and body as part of a view or an idea in the mind. So you can just give a soft mental label that's as simple as thinking. There's just a recognition that thinking is happening in the mind. And this needs to be quite soft. Otherwise you might find if you use a bit more energy or force, it will just stop the thought dead. And the idea is to be able to observe thinking, what a thought feels like in the mind, not to make it go away. So soft, light touch. And thinking is a catch-all. But you can notice different types of thoughts or different groupings or categories of thoughts. So someone mentioned planning a couple of days ago, noticing planning thoughts. Noticing remembering happening. Be aware of any anticipating thoughts, perhaps thoughts about the future. So what this type of awareness does is it allows us to be aware of the type of thought without going into the story, the content. So the content will be known, but we don't take it any further or give it any more energy. There might be images in the mind. Or imagining. Fantasizing. And there might be repeating. We repeat a lot of our thoughts. The mind enjoys thinking. And you might notice that sense of pleasure or enjoyment that's keeping thinking going. And there's nothing wrong with thinking, of course. A natural function of the mind, a very important one. But our intention at the moment in practice is to be aware, to prioritize awareness so that it can recognize thinking happening. You might notice judging thoughts. It can be very helpful to identify them. Or comparing mind. Not necessarily comparing yourself to somebody else, but perhaps comparing your practice today to your practice yesterday. Simply comparing mind. And you might notice thoughts connected with wanting something or not wanting something. There's wanting in the mind or not wanting. And you might notice thoughts that you really don't want to treat like other thoughts. the view or the idea is that they're too important. So you might label important thoughts, or even the big one. For the purposes of this exercise, simply thoughts happening in awareness. That's the aim. Not trying to catch every thought. Just aiming to be present. And from that present moment awareness, what do you notice? Sensations, sounds, and mental activity, different types of thoughts, perceptions. So I've just noticed a slightly anguished question in the chat, a sort of question. So hopefully what I'm saying will address that, that tension, if you like. You're not trying to make something go away, but you're not trying to make it stay either. You're in a way letting the thought have its process. And all I was pointing to in the meditation is it's very easy to, I think we almost have an inbuilt bias that thought shouldn't be there. So looking to counter that by, saying it's very easy to then try and snap them off with our awareness. It's like, I'm aware of you. So you've almost jumped on a thought, which can frighten it into oblivion. So you're just trying to avoid doing that, but it has its natural process. How long do thoughts last in the mind? Actually, when we observe them in their natural process, not very long at all. So it's not surprising that they come. They're like any other object. They persist for a little while and they disappear. All we're looking to avoid is that sense of some hidden view that the thought shouldn't be happening. So I jump on it with a little bit much force. I'm aware of it a little bit forcefully. So I'm going to say a little bit about thinking, and then we'll meditate, because it's a big thing in meditation, I think, this area of thoughts and thinking. And just to say right off, it's a natural function of the mind, completely essential. Thinking nature. Thinking has its own nature, and it has, if you like, any object has a job description. So thinking's job is to think, and awareness's job is to observe that thinking in process. So thoughts are ethically neutral. I think they're indetermined or undetermined in the categorization of mental events. So we can think alongside defilements, kleshas. So we can think in a way fueled by greed, hatred, and delusion. Or we can think with wisdom and other positive qualities. So think our thoughts can be sort of guided by metta, by patience, by goodwill. I quite like the idea that wisdom thinks too. So wisdom thinks about, in this situation, thinks about how to practice, thinks about what's helpful in the moment, thinks about, okay, wisdom reminds us to be aware in the present moment. In our lives, in the world, I think wisdom often thinks about what's best for a situation. So there's a distinct lack of self-interest in the way that the wisdom mind thinks. So you might notice that quality in the mind sometimes when actually it's open, it's fluid, it's able to think a bit more objectively about what would be helpful here, what's the best thing for the situation. And there can be less of a sense of, in a way, it all revolving around what's best for me, or what's best for the people I'm sort of aligned with in this situation. So we're looking to see thoughts as an object arising in experience. I think it's either Larry Rosenberg or John Kabat-Zinn who says something like, sometimes there's a trickle of thoughts in the mind and sometimes a cascade, and it doesn't matter which. So it's not our job to try and reduce the number of thoughts in the mind, but to notice them from awareness. I think there's a lot of potential in being able to observe a thought or thinking as an object. If we simply know that thinking is happening, we are much less likely to get caught up in the story. And in a way, we lose awareness when we're caught in the story. When we're able to observe thinking, perhaps even quite a lot of thinking, that's not what we might usually think of that as being distracted. But actually it's not, because awareness is there, awareness is able to observe. So just the presence of a lot of thinking does not equal distraction. Being lost in thoughts is what makes, qualifies as a distraction. I think we can have a lot of insight into how we create our world through observing our thoughts. But from that slightly stepped back position, it's able to simply notice. And when we understand that a thought is simply a thought, when we understand the nature of thinking, we can find that there's less sense of belief, there's less suffering in our thinking, because we don't completely believe it, we don't take it so personally. And often, because that identification is quite strong, we do believe our thoughts, even when they're completely inconsistent from one half hour to the next, or 1 minute to the next. There's a sense of belief. Oh, I believe this. Oh no, now I believe this. And we can go back and forth in a very contradictory sort of way. But if we're able to just hold it all a bit more lightly, thinking happening, allow thinking to arise, allow it to arise. I think often what we try and do with thoughts is we try and work something out. We try and fix problems, and we can put a lot of energy into that. But actually, in this sort of practice, we're allowing something that's perhaps beyond the thinking mind, beyond that narrow sense of self. So if we simply set up the conditions where awareness and right view are working in the mind, then in a way we allow what's happening to be worked with or worked on by awareness and wisdom, by awareness and right view. And I was thinking of something that was said yesterday I think it's Matthew saying in relation to the body, that the body had a lot more wisdom than I do. And I was thinking that sense of we can, it's very, very natural for us to identify with the mind or with awareness, that it's me. But actually this is awareness in a like any other object. It's impersonal. It's a mental factor that we can cultivate. It's a mental quality that can arise in the mind, and its nature is to be aware. Its nature is to observe what's happening. So just as we're in a way learning not to identify with sensations in the body, learning not to identify with mental objects like thoughts, we're also learning to recognize and not identify with awareness, with that which is knowing what's happening. I can't remember who it is, someone who said, I think it's maybe Ayakema, talks about, she's talking about thinking as the last sort of hideout of the self, but I think awareness actually maybe has that role. It's easy to sort of hide out that sense of self, to sort of stay quite hidden in how I'm aware, my awareness. Actually, it's just awareness, noticing mental processes. So back to that little comment by Upandita, Sayadaw Upandita, any thought can arise in any mind at any time. And that can help us see the impersonal nature of thinking. But it can be helpful when you notice how personally, in a way, you take your thoughts. What do my thoughts say about me? How much belief or identification in any moment is there with what I believe to be true? It can be very interesting just to watch, as I was saying, that the contradictory nature of our thoughts and beliefs. The moments of belief in, oh, I'm great, this is going really well, and then the belief that I'm rubbish. This is rubbish, and I'll never amount to a decent meditator, whatever it is, but just in a way, just playing, letting the mind be sort of, the less identified with those sorts of beliefs, the less suffering they will cause us. We get caught by our thoughts and our thinking really, really easily. And they're subtle events, aren't they? Subtle things happening in the mind. I've got a little quote from somebody. I was on a retreat I was leading at Buddhafield a few years ago, and her teacher, not a Triratna teacher, had said to her, he said, don't touch your thoughts. And she sort of laughed a bit, and he said, I mean it. Don't touch your thoughts. It's like, don't get involved. Don't get involved. But observe them. We know what's being thought without getting overly involved. Okay. All right, so let's sit, and I'll lead us in to meditation, and I'll allow a bit of time at the end just to hear anything about how the practice was for you, or how the practice has been either practiced this morning. So I want to start just with a reading from Lama Shenpen Hukum, from her book, There's More to Dying Than Death. And she says, one thing you might notice when you meditate is that you can't tell where thoughts are happening. We tend to say they happen in the head or in the mind. But we don't know anything about the inside of our head directly. We only know we have a head because of a whole lot of ideas and memories that we put together. Awareness is not in the head. Rather, the head is an idea that is in awareness. In fact, we have no idea where awareness is. Taking the time to come home to body and mind, come home to the present moment. And noticing if there's any difference in how you feel, how the mind and body feel when awareness is present. And perhaps you can just catch the sense of what it was like when awareness was not present, often just before awareness returns. And so you can have some sense of comparison. So as you sit with experience, embodied awareness through the senses, just every now and again, letting the sphere of mindfulness include thoughts and thinking, mental images. And there can be different sorts of thoughts and thinking. You can use the labeling if you find it helpful. But you can also notice how thoughts feel in the mind. Sometimes there's quite loud, intentional thinking, or loud emotional thoughts that come with quite strong energy. An intentional thought might be something like, oh, I must remember to do such and such. So you can notice how those sorts of thoughts appear in the mind. Or a loud emotional thought, she shouldn't do that. That's not right. But there can also be quite wispy, floaty threads of thoughts, loosely connected, though we don't always see the connections. Just conditioned arisings in the mind. And there can also be a subtle inner narrative. It feels like it's always going on somewhere in the depths. So looking gently out of the corner of the mind's eye. Not trying to see a thought directly. Or perhaps checking the quality of the energy or effort. We need just enough energy to be present. If you find there's any sense of strain or of chasing thoughts or trying to catch them all, that's a lot of energy. So just relaxing back, settling, noticing what you notice. Making sure that you stay connected with your overall experience, a broad sense of embodied awareness. A thought isn't simply words or images. There can be all sorts of fragments of experience that form an inner world, an inner language. Sense of knowing, an inner direction or impulse, perceptions and feelings. Being curious about a thought. Allow a thought to fall apart under a soft, curious, open and attentive awareness. What is a thought? And if the mind feels quite quiet, not many thoughts around, just staying with that sense of quiet or peacefulness, spaciousness. Letting the mind stay awake in that place, so that when a thought comes along, it's noticed in the awareness. Right view of thinking, simply knowing a thought as a thought. A right view can also recognize any identification with the thought as me or mine. Recognizing either is helpful to the mind, means that there's some degree of wisdom working away. Sometimes a thought starts and the whole story is known in an instant. Sometimes the loud thinking wants to repeat it laboriously. But if awareness is already there, the story's known to the mind. We can give thoughts so much power, believing our thoughts, believing what they say about us or others. But what are they in experience? How substantial are they? How transient? Just knowing a thought as a thought in the moment. How do you know that thinking is happening? Not asking the question for an answer, but to invite interest about the process, mysteriousness of mind and awareness, and of thinking itself. So perhaps hearing from people that we've not yet heard from, at least initially. I've just got time to hear from a few folks. Anything you'd like to say, perhaps about that practice, what your experience was, what you noticed in that practice, or possibly the one before around labeling. So if you could put an electronic hand up, or wait for Vajrapriya to
Jackie
catch. Okay, so Jackie, if you could unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi. Jackie, I'm not hearing you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So when I was aware, I felt very sort of content and blissful and relaxed. And then I started to think about, it was planning, and I was thinking about paying money and having to pay for the B&B retreat and things like this. And then I came back and I realised that I'd been thinking. And I suppose what I noticed is that I didn't hear the sounds anymore. I didn't feel anything. My mind was completely on the planning and having to pay. And I didn't even notice I went with the thought. So I lost that blissful feeling of contentment.
Yeah, great, good observation. Yeah, the difference between the quality of the mind that's noticing, that's aware, and one that's perhaps got very caught up in thinking. Yeah, but just great to notice, in a way, we will again and again go in between those two and hopefully observe more and more about how we slide into thinking and also the process of coming out of realizing, oh, in the present again, what's that like? So it becomes more and more sort of seamless, if you like, these comings and goings of mindfulness. Thank you. Who? Anjali.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm looking for you usually, but yeah, carry on. Oh, there you are. There you are. Great.
Okay. Yeah, I found that really interesting because it took most of the meditation before I could have a sense of as if the awareness is here, and then as I labeled the thoughts, they were released and flowed away. So there ended up being quite a gap between my sense of awareness and the actual thoughts themselves. But I had lots of visuals in my practice, which I normally do, and I had a quick question around if there's a difference between mental images and the more imaginative, or what I would call the more imaginative kind of visuals that come up, and I'm guessing not, but
yeah, the more sort of visionary.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm not really sure. You know, I'm not really sure. I know that there's a lot of sort of quite automatic images that come up as a way of thinking. They're part of the thinking process. I have a friend who has very, very strong sort of, you know, visionary experiences, and they're a significant part of his practice, and they hold significant insights for him. So I think anyway, hold them lightly. They're still, if you like, images in the mind, and with this, we're not deliberately looking to let things go. So it's not that there can be a concern about, oh, I'm letting something go that's really valuable. But actually, if you know, if it is this more visionary type, then it probably will unfold in some way, and you can be aware of that unfolding of it.
So in terms of developing this awareness muscle, is it more useful in this practice to think of it as a mental image? Is that more helpful in terms of this practice?
Yeah. What else might you call it?
That's a good question. I think something about my mind working. I smiled when you said that our thinking in practice is often about trying to work something out. So I think that's how I normally understand the images that come up. For me, it's just a creative way that my mind is trying to work something out to make sense.
Yeah, so you can let that unfold.
Right.
Yeah, you can let that unfold rather than thinking about what it might mean.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the difference in this practice. It's like we don't, in a way, something comes out of, and it may be that it's something that is, you know, using Vajradevi's language from last night, is more from a sort of big mind perspective. But if we start thinking about it, then it's easy to sort of reduce it to little mind again. But actually, in a way, it's a sense of trusting awareness and wisdom to that they know a bit better. They know better than us. So let something unfold. Otherwise, I think there is the danger of sort of short-circuiting a process that's quite important. So there's a sense of trusting that awareness is enough, and that awareness is not reducing something. Awareness is allowing something more to flow or to unfold.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Maybe one more person. Is there anyone else? Pardon?
No one lined up here.
Okay. That's, I can see Tim doing something with his hands, but I've no idea.
Yes, Tim.
What. Okay. Were you waving? I couldn't see. You could just see your fingers sort of flapping around in front of the screen. I can't see your head at all, Tim. It might help us to see your head. Great, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, one question. When I'm trying to look for thoughts, be aware of thoughts, I can't find any. But when I, like normally in my practice, I normally focus on the breath, and then thoughts appear in my peripheral awareness.
Yeah.
So in this particular practice, ought I be having a sort of quiet focus on the breath and then letting things happen in the background and be aware of it? Because when I'm trying to look or concentrate on looking for thoughts, they don't. I can't find them.
Sorry, you've gone really quiet. You went really, really quiet right at the end.
So ought I to just have a quiet focus on the breath and let things happen? And because when I try to look for them deliberately, they don't appear, or I can't find them.
Yeah. Okay, so I think what you're describing is, so when you have got that focus on the breath, anyway, maybe let's forget about the breath for the moment, but it sounds like there's perhaps the quality of energy that you're using is quite strong. There's quite a looking for, rather than when I talked about sound, there's a sense of receiving input or sounds just arising, or even sensations just arising in experience. And it's exactly the same with thought. So in a way, we don't have to anticipate thoughts arising in the same way that a sound just arises. We don't have any sense of control about particularly sounds outside, when they might arise and when they might not. And it's exactly the same with thoughts. If we just need to be present. And sometimes a light anchoring in the body or in the breath can in a way, it helps us stay present. So feel free to do that. But in a way, it just helps support a quality of awareness that's not actively engaged in looking or seeking out, but it can have that more receptive quality. Yeah, great.
That's great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so pretty much done this morning. Mokshika, would you like to say anything about the session this afternoon?
Hi. Yeah, just to say, I'll be doing a couple of awareness exercises, touching on some of the things that we've covered, that Vajradevi's covered already. So we'll be looking at doing an exercise on spheres or fields of awareness, and also a little bit more about anchoring awareness, which Vajradevi's just referred to as well, which is quite different from the mindfulness of breathing. In fact, we won't probably use the breath. Just to come as you are, really, but in a sense, I think it's probably useful not to to sit in our the usual way that we sit for meditation, because these very much are explorations, kind of exercises. So we'll be doing about 2 of them, perhaps 3. Okay.
Great, thank you. Okay, so yeah, enjoy your afternoons. Try and take awareness with you, let awareness accompany you. Really notice those moments where you think, awareness is present with whatever is happening, whatever you're doing. Notice that presence of awareness when it arises. Okay, and see you later.